Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Connect and Learn webinar. It's great to have you all online with us. Before we get started, I'd really like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from where we're broadcasting out into webinar land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I'd like to pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, extend that respect to all Aboriginal people in our communities and across the globe today. Today's topic is Naloxone Saving Lives, which is a timely presentation given that this Saturday is International Overdose Awareness Day, which is a global event held on the 31st of August each year, aiming to raise awareness and awareness of overdose and reduce the stigma of drug-related deaths. But before we go on, I'd just like to remind you that the webinars are part of Turning Point's Connect and Learn series, which are designed to support you guys as AOD clinicians throughout regional and metropolitan Victoria. My name's Rita. I'll be your facilitating today's webinar. And we love these webinars to be as interactive as possible, so please do use the functions that are on the top of your screen. We encourage you to ask questions anytime throughout the webinar by clicking on the blue hand that you'll see up there. Part of my role will be to collate these questions, put them together, and we'll present them to Chris to respond to at the end, so we'll have some time to do that. You can also download a copy of the slides that we're showing you today by clicking the little blue arrow. And while we do encourage everybody to stay right to the end and participate in our exit survey, this will give us an opportunity to provide feedback and suggest topics for future webinars that we'd love to present to you. But if you can't stick around, we encourage you to click on the little yellow feedback symbol, and the survey will open up in your browser and you'll be able to provide some feedback that way. So without any further ado, I'm pretty excited today to welcome to the webinar our presenter Chris Omani from Pennington Institute. Chris has worked with people who use alcohol and other drugs for more than 25 years across the UK and Australia. He heads up, he's a project lead at Pennington and looks after statewide naloxone training amongst many other things. So thanks for coming to join us today, Chris. We're really excited to have you on board. It's pretty timely, especially with this as an International Overdose Awareness Day event. We're looking forward to what you've got to share with us.
Cool, that's me.
Yeah, it's all yours.
Thanks, Rita, and thanks, everyone. I've got to tell you, I'm not used to being on a camera, so my voice might get a bit squeaky and I might get a bit fidgety, but I'm sorry about that if I do. Yes, my name's Chris Omani, and I work at Pennington Institute, which is a research and advocacy agency. It's based up the street here in Melbourne in Carlton, but we do work all over the country, and in fact we organise International Overdose Awareness Days, so we actually do work all around the world. International Overdose Awareness Day is on this Saturday. It's actually originally a Melbourne thing. It started in St Kilda some years ago, but now it's actually a global event. We also released the other day Australia's annual overdose report, which I'll talk about some of the figures that came out of it in a minute. And we provide support for needle and syringe programs around Victoria and around Australia. We also run the Community Overdose Prevention and Education Program, or the COPE program, which you can see the logo of on the slide there, which helps agencies set up and run naloxone programs around Victoria. Today we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about overdose in Australia. Sorry, forgot about that. Overdose in Australia. Talk about naloxone, talk a bit about prevention, and talk a bit about how to recognise and respond to an overdose using naloxone, using some of the different types of naloxone that are available. I'm going to give you some statistics now from our annual overdose report. Well, I want you to remember that when we say statistics, we're actually talking about people here, you know, but sometimes we can get a bit lost with the numbers and think, oh, there's this many numbers, but they're actually people that you know, they all had their individual stories. They were all someone's kid. They were all someone's mom or someone's cousin, someone's friend. And it's worth remembering that. In Australia in 2017, there was 1,612 unintentional drug-related deaths. That's not all of the drug-related deaths in Australia, but that's all the unintentional ones. That number is going up each year by 3.5%. So it's actually increasing fairly dramatically. At the moment, we've got one person dying every 5.5 hours or so from drug overdose, drug-related death. That's about 4 people every day. So since yesterday, 4, by this time tomorrow, be 4, the next day 4, next day 4, and it just keeps on going. Most commonly, opioids are the drug that's most common when it comes to overdose. But usually there's more than one drug. When you think about opioids, I suppose the thing that people think of straight away is heroin, because that's what's in the news and stuff all the time. If you look at heroin only as a single drug overdose, there was 75 people died in 2017 of heroin only overdose. There was 74 died of alcohol only overdose. So when you think of it, it's single drugs. There's as many people dying from alcohol only as there is from heroin only. But like I said, most people die on multiple drugs. And in fact, in 2017, 445 people died on 4 or more drugs, including alcohol. That's if you include alcohol. So quite a combination of drugs. Most people, if you ask them out in the public, who dies of drug overdose, most people will tell you, it's young men in Richmond or young men in the city. But contrary to popular belief, only about less than 1 in 10 people who die of drug overdose in Australia are under the age of 30. Most people are between the age of 30 and 59, about 70%, and in fact, it's most commonly people in their 40s. So between the age of 40 and 49 is the people who die. People my age, people your age?
Roughly the same.
Roughly the same, yeah. So people our age is the kind of people who are dying. Men make up 7 out of 10 of all the fatalities. And if you look at Aboriginal people in Australia, the numbers are much, much worse. They're 3 times as likely. An Aboriginal person is 3 times as likely to die of a drug-related, drug-induced death than a non-Aboriginal person. I have to have a drink of water, sorry. Now, overdose just means too much of a drug or a combination of drugs for your body to deal with. And when we're talking about opioid drugs and other depressant drugs, what happens is the messages from your brain to your body slow down to the point where your breathing can get dangerously slow, or it can stop altogether. When we're talking about drug overdose, it's easy to identify the people who are at risk of drug overdose, of opioid overdose. They're the people who use opioid drugs. So any opioid drug, heroin, methadone, morphine, any of the oxycodone-style drugs, so endone, codeine, fentanyl, which is a very scary drug, fentanyl being about 50 times stronger than heroin, about 100 times stronger than morphine. And we're not just talking about illicit drugs. We're talking about, or drugs used illicitly. We're also talking about prescription medicine. And on the Pennington website, if there's any pharmacists looking, we've got things like this about talking to clients, talking to patients about Naloxone. Particularly people who've got new prescriptions or they've changed medicine or they're on multiple prescriptions. It's important that if you're going to do Naloxone, that it becomes part of your core business. So it can't be just something you do every now and again, or it just won't work. I'll do that one. Sorry. Where possible in an agency, it's a good idea to have 1 or 2 people who are responsible for looking after Naloxone. That doesn't mean that they have to do all the training or anything. It's just they make sure that everyone's up to date on what's happening and that the program keeps going. We'd like Naloxone training to be Naloxone to be an opt-out rather than an opt-in thing with your clients. So everyone that comes through the door, you can ask, do you use opioid drugs? And if they say yes, do you want to learn how to use Naloxone? It'll take 5 minutes. It could save yours or your mate's life. If they say no, you say, well, do you know anyone who uses opioid drugs? And if they do, again, offer the training so everyone's doing it. It takes literally a few minutes to show people how to use Naloxone. What we want them to know is the overdose risks. So for a bit of prevention, what naloxone is and what it does, how to recognize and respond to an opioid overdose with naloxone. Now, naloxone is also known as Narcan by some people, but Narcan does tend to have a bit of a bad name with people who kind of automatically assume there's going to be huge withdrawal symptoms and that. So try and keep it talking about naloxone, really, because that's what we're talking about. It's a medication that only reverses the effects of opioid overdose, does nothing else whatsoever. You can't get high on it. There's no misuse potential. In fact, for years ago when we set up this program, we asked people, tell us how you could misuse naloxone, because someone will say, no, you shouldn't do it because it can be misused. And the only thing people could come up with is that if they didn't like someone, they could wreck their buzz. You know? So it's not like, you know, people can get high on it. It doesn't really have any street sale value, that kind of thing. It works very simply. Naloxone has a stronger affinity with opioid receptors than opioids. So when you use opioids and they attach to the receptors in your brain, you know, they're like switches. They switch on. You get that nice, warm, cozy feeling, or you stop hanging out and you stop feeling rubbish. And the messages from your brain to your body slow down, and your breathing can, like I said earlier, get dangerously slow or stop altogether. When you introduce naloxone, those opioid receptors like the look of the naloxone better than they like the look of the opioids, so they kick the opioids off and they attach to the naloxone. And then, you know, the switches get switched off and you can breathe again. It's a temporary measure, though. It's not like, I don't know if anti-venom is a permanent thing or not, but it's not like anti-venom. It's a temporary thing. It buys you time for emergency services to turn up. In the city, that's probably going to be the AMBOs. In the country, that might be the Country Fire Authority here in Victoria. It might be the cops. It could be anyone that turns up. But it's, it buys you time for that. The guidelines say it's about 30 to 90 minutes for that the naloxone will last. However, that's not an exact. It might be less and it might be longer, you know, depending on how much the person's had of the opioids. It depends on how much naloxone they've had. So don't waste time, basically. Call for help, use the naloxone. Excuse me. It's worth saying here that when naloxone is used on someone, there's a very good chance that they'll go into withdrawals because the opioid's been pushed off the receptors in their brain. When they go into withdrawals, they're going to feel very, very uncomfortable. They may want to use again to avoid that discomfort. They've already had enough drugs in their system to drop once, and when the naloxone wears off, those drugs will zoom back into the receptors and they might drop again anyway. But if they use on top, they're almost starting to go down, again. Especially if they use, you know, other opioid drugs, they have another hit, have some alcohol, something like that. Now, you can see, no, that's fine. You can see naloxone formulations on the thing, the PowerPoint. Sorry, the PowerPoint. It comes in Australia in ampules in a pre-filled syringe called Prenoxad, and it comes in a nasal spray called Nixoid. Each of them has some good stuff about it, and each of them has some issues about it. So we're kind of all about choice, about helping people understand what's the positive and the negatives. With naloxone ampules, as you can see some here, they're quite fiddly. They're small, they're quite fiddly, they're not exactly the easiest thing to open. Medicine can get stuck up the top of them. They're not great, to be honest, in an emergency in an emergency situation. You also do, when you get them, it don't come with needles, they don't come with syringes, so you've got to go and get them. However, some people do prefer them. Yeah? Some people like using the ampules, and as you get 5, if you use 2, you've still got 3. You know what I mean? So there is some good things about it. The nasal spray, Nixoid, which I won't open now, I'll show you how to use them later on, it's kind of like the new kid on the block. It's only been around in Australia for a little while. It's got some really, really good stuff about it. This is a dummy one here. It's really easy to use. It is literally just stick it up someone's nose and press the button. You know, there's nothing more to it than that. Very, very easy to use. probably a really good option for people who aren't used to needles, people who don't, they're not comfortable opening amps, they're not comfortable screwing on needles. I'd be thinking certainly with some workers in some situations, and certainly with, Nana and Grandad, if Nana's on lots of painkillers, and if Grandad has one of these and he's a bit shaky, it's much better for Grandad to use one of these than it is to use, try to be attaching needles and stuff. The drawbacks with this is that there's a lot of naloxone in it, which can be a good thing, but the problem is someone's almost definitely going to some fairly serious withdrawals, so there's a good chance they might use again. The other problem with this at the moment is that it's only available over the counter in Australia right now, and it's quite expensive. It's not available on a prescription just yet. We're hoping that by the middle of next year it'll be available on a prescription, but these things can take some time. This is the other one that I'm going to talk about. This is called Prenoxad. It's a pre-filled syringe. It opens in a funny way. You crack one hand forward and one hand back. It comes, it's got, well, this is actually a dummy one. It's not a real one. It comes in a pre-filled syringe. It's very easy to use, which we'll show you in a minute. It's got 5 doses in it, in case you need more doses, which is pretty good. But you've got to be careful that you don't give someone all 5 doses all at once. That's not going to, if you give them all 5 doses at once, they'll certainly go into withdrawals. I mean, naloxone in itself isn't a dangerous drug. I could be injecting Rita with naloxone here all day long, and if she didn't have any opioids in her system, she'd get a sore arm from when I'm injecting her, but besides that, it's not really going to do anything to her. Prenoxad and Nixol, or Prenoxad and the amps are available, like I said, on a prescription. We'd always prefer someone to get their naloxone on a prescription because it's cheaper for a start, and also it's contact with a doctor, basically. Nixol's only available over the counter. The normal PBS prices account for when you're getting these ones on a prescription. So, if you're on a healthcare card, it's $6.50 or whatever it is. And if you're not, it's $39 or $40 or whatever. When you're buying them over the counter, though, the price can get fairly high fairly quickly. Ampules for 5 of them, and I just got this information this morning from a place in St Kilda. It might be different depending on where you go in the state. Over the counter, 5 ampules is about $60. The pre-filled syringe, Prenoxad, is about $69, $70. And the Nixoid spray, where you get 2 in a pack, is about $85. So we're talking about a fairly expensive thing, which is another reason why we're saying prescription is better, really. In Victoria, I don't know if people are from outside the state that are watching this or not, but in Victoria we have a thing called the Naloxone Subsidy Initiative, where the Victorian government, through DHHS, has given funding to 26 or 27, I can't remember exactly which one now, agencies across the state to pay for naloxone for their clients. I think you can get those, the ones nearest you on Direct Line, which is 1-800-888-236. Excuse me. I'm going to talk a little bit about prevention before I talk some more about naloxone. I'm not going to talk very long about it, though, because we don't have a huge length of time. That's an example of a fact sheet that's available on our website. When you're talking to people, if you've got a chance to talk about prevention, it's pretty good. I mean, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as my mother used to say, which, by the way, doesn't translate into kilos and grams very easily. But an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So it's really worth, if you can, speak to clients about overdose. Bear in mind that not everyone that's watching this who's interested in providing naloxone for their clients is a drug and alcohol worker or a harm reduction worker, so they don't necessarily have a huge amount of understanding of overdose. Ask your clients what they know already, because your clients will likely know a lot about this. They'll many clients know a lot about, many people who use drugs know a lot about using drugs. Some know more than others. And many of these people that you're talking to may have overdosed in the past, or they may have had friends that overdose, so they might know quite a bit about it. Bear in mind, it can be a very touchy subject, especially if people have lost friends, so just be smart about it. I'm not going to go into all of the things that are on there now, other than to say what I don't want you to do is sit with a form reading it out to someone, Rita, try not to mix drugs. Taking more than one drug can increase your risk of overdose, because Rita's going to get fed up and she's going to walk out. Familiarise yourself with this stuff. Ask people what they know. If they say, yeah, I know mixing drugs can be dangerous, you don't have to go into a big, did you know mixing drugs can be dangerous, because the person knows that. So back up what they've got right. If they've got something that, that we've all had bits of information in the past that have turned out not to be correct, just, correct them in as nice a way as you can and fill in the blanks, basically. Basically, it's get some naloxone. Try and not use by yourself. We know people do, but try not to use by yourself. And if you're going to use by yourself, are you using somewhere that you'll be found if you drop? So think about these things. A bit of thought ahead could save your life. Try not to mix drugs. When we said that first, we thought, well, most people mix their drugs, or a lot of people mix their drugs. Why are we telling people this? It doesn't take from the fact that we should be telling the information that's correct. And it could be something like, don't have 5 different kinds of drugs at once, or if you're on really high dose methadone and you want to have a hit of heroin today, should you take your high dose methadone as well as having your hit of heroin? Things like that. Have a test taste whenever you've had a break, or even if you haven't had a break. Especially if you've had a break for a couple of days, you haven't been able to score, or you've wanted to have a break, or you've been unable to score for one reason or another. Little test taste first. You can always have the rest of it after that. Excuse me. There's information about like this on the Pennington website, and also I would suggest that people contact Harm Reduction Victoria. I don't have the number handy, I'm afraid, but if you Google them, I'm sure you'll be able to find them, and that's the peer organisation here in Victoria. It's also worth having a plan in advance. Victorians are pretty good at plans, especially in the country. They do bushfire plans and things like that. And you might be thinking, why is he talking about in the country? And the simple truth is there's more people dying per population in the country of drug overdose now than there is in the cities. So make a plan. It's no good talking to people about overdose. Well, it's not no good, but it's better to talk to them about overdose before they overdose than after they overdose, Things like it's no good having your naloxone in the bedroom if you're using in the kitchen, or vice versa, or if you go to your mate's house and you left your naloxone at home. It's no good to your home. You need to have it with you. Stick it on the table. If me and Rita are using together, stick it on the table. Hey Rita, do you know what that is? Yeah, I know what that is. That's naloxone. I've got my own here. Fantastic. If you drop, I'll give you a hit of this. If I drop, you do the same to me. Perfect. If I put that on the table and Rita says no idea what that is, I can say, well, this is naloxone. I can spend 5 minutes telling her how to use it, and we can make the deal again. Excuse me. And they can tell their mates where to get it. Now, the signs of opioid overdose are a little bit different, or can be very different, to the signs of, we say, a methamphetamine overdose. The main thing we look for is unresponsiveness. Like if someone can't respond to you, then they're in trouble. Now, being told to bugger off is a response, all right? Whereas that's not a response. Snoring and gargling noises, it could be someone snoring, but it could be that they can't breathe very well. So we don't leave people in that situation. Irregular breathing, shallow breathing, no breathing whatsoever. If you're a pasty-looking Irish guy like me, you might get blue lips when there's not a lot of oxygen going to your lips. If you've got very dark skin, you might still get the blue lips, but you might also kind of go an ashen grey look as you're not getting enough oxygen. Excuse me. The limp body, the heavy nod, we've all seen it like that. Saying that, someone might be just on the nod. Don't go running up and sticking naloxone into someone if they're just on the nod, because if they're just on the nod, they won't be very happy with you for doing it. Possible vomiting as well. Basically, all of those things, but go back to the unresponsiveness all the time. If you can get a response, doesn't mean they're grand forever. Checking them again and keep checking on people. That's a drink of water, sorry. To respond to an overdose, try and get a response. If you can't get a response, call for help. 000. Make sure people know the number for 000. I know this sounds kind of funny to think this, but I was at a conference in one of the colleges here last year, and they told me that 20-something%, I don't remember the exact number, of students, first-year students, including ones who'd been brought up in Australia, had no idea what the number for emergency services was. So you'd think people would know it, but they may not. A lot of people probably think it's 911 because of that whole American TV. People tell me that works as well, but I've really no idea. Ring 000. Put someone into call 000. Tell them what's happening. Yeah, tell them it's a drug overdose. There's a story went around for years that if you tell people it's a heart attack, they'd turn up sooner. The ambos would turn up sooner. They won't turn up sooner. They'll turn up exactly the same time, but they'll be expecting a heart attack rather than expecting an overdose. So please tell them exactly what's happening. Put someone in the recovery position, and then give them naloxone. Now, it's worth noting too that with Nixoids, with the nasal spray, that order is reversed. Okay, you give them the nasal spray first, then you put them in the recovery position. But with the injectable naloxone, it's recovery position, then naloxone. It's worth thinking as well that when, I'm sure everyone did their first aid training and they did recovery position, you probably lay down perfectly flat with your arms down by your side in the middle of the floor and someone turns you over. The chances of coming across someone who's overdosed in a perfectly straight line with their hands by their sides are fairly slim. So it's worth trying to, the next time you do this, the next time you do any kind of recovery position stuff, ask the first aid person to show you how to do it from a chair or lying in a corner, or just other than just lying down. Give them the naloxone. I'll show you how to use the nasal spray and the peroxide in a second. And then it's rescue breathing and CPR if the person's heart is beating but they're not breathing. It's rescue breathing, which is 2 slow breaths and then a breath every 5 seconds. And if there's no signs of life at all, it's CPR. If you're trained how to do CPR, if you're comfortable doing it. If there's no response after a couple of minutes, naloxone, it's not like Pulp Fiction. You're not going to stick something in it, they're going to spring up. It's going to take a little while to work. So after 2 to 3 minutes, you can give them a second dose, and you can keep giving people doses so long as they're timed, 2 to 3 minutes apart. After someone has been given naloxone, they're going to come around. They might be confused. They might not be quite sure what's happening. They might feel pretty sick. We really don't want them to be left alone for a couple hours. Now, hopefully the ambulance will have arrived fairly promptly. Sometimes people go with the ambulance, sometimes people don't go with the ambulance. So at least we'd rather they didn't use, and if they weren't left alone for a couple of hours. Now, naloxone is very easy to use. I'm going to show you how to use the peroxide and the nasal spray. Can I borrow you just for a second? Is that
sure.
Okay? Yeah. Imagine that Rita is just, she's after ODing. I'm just literally, I put that up her nose and I press the button. That's it. I'm not trying to spray this stuff into Rita's brain, so I don't have to, ram it up there. It just goes inside because it forms a film on the mucous membrane. I hate that word. The nose interior. It forms in the nose interior, and it will keep absorbing. Then, with peroxide, slightly different. It opens, like I said, in a funny way. Crack one hand forward, one hand back, And in there, oh sorry, I didn't. Yeah, you need to move on. I think. Sorry. Yeah. In here, it's got some needles and it's got the pre-filled syringe. You simply, if you've got the right glasses on, you simply peel back the wrapper, unscrew the little stopper at the top, screw on the needle, and it's ready to go. It's got 5 doses in it, and they're marked clearly down the side. And you ready? No, I'm joking. I had a little sponge somewhere, but I can't seem to find it. But that's all right. You just put it in. It goes up in a shoulder or in a thigh. It's got a 23 gauge needle, which is a really quite a long, sharp needle. It needs to be long and sharp because it needs to go into a muscle, which means it needs to go through skin and fat at least an inch into a muscle. Don't worry about this person's probably unconscious. Don't be worried about pulling clothes off or anything. That will go straight through a jacket. That will go straight through a pair of jeans. That would, there's absolutely no worry about that whatsoever. There you go. And you can pop it back on this. You can pop it back in this thing ready for the next time. Things. And it just presses down. A single dose just presses down, and then again and again and again. Equal doses. Things not to do with people. Don't leave them alone. If they've overdosed, don't stick them in the shower, or the bath or something like that, because all they're going to do is slip over and smash their heads open, and you might do yours too, and then both of you are in trouble. If they've overdosed on opioids, don't be giving them a hit of ice or something to try and bring them round. It's not going to work. It's just going to make things worse. Don't inject anything else besides naloxone. Don't make them vomit, because if they vomit, they might get, they might choke on their vomit. If you're trying to make them vomit, don't slap them around. It's not going to wake them up. I should have said a minute ago about getting a response from people. To get a response, you can call their name, scream their name, check first that they don't have syringes in their hands or something like that, because if you go in to try and shake them and they're just on the nod and they go like this, you're going to get that in the eye, right? Now that won't be cool. Yeah. So shake make sure there's no needles or anything. Shake their shoulder, and if there's still no, or kick their foot, if there's still no kind of response, you're going to have to cause them a little bit of pain. Yeah? Now, I don't mean injury. I'm talking about a little bit of pain by squeezing, like pinching their earlobe or pulling the hair in the back of their neck, or getting a pen and squashing their thumbnail, something like that, which causes a little bit of pain to get a response, but won't cause any kind of permanent injury for them. Excuse me. Naloxone, just to finish up for the questions. 35 minutes, that's all right, isn't it?
Perfect.
Has a shelf life of a couple of years. The instructions are to store at room temperature, but this is a really hardy medicine, and we want you to have it with you, wherever you're using. So if you're going to be using away from home, there's no point leaving it at room temperature at home. So do have it with you. Check the expiry date and just get a refill, get a replacement before the expiry date. And like I said, keep it with you at all times.
Amazing, thanks, Chris.
Was that too fast?
No, that was perfect. It was very animated and high energy, which is always really exciting to absorb the information. A lot to get through. A lot of information there for people to absorb. We have had one question come through related to whether there'll be a link to watch back the webinar on demand. There will. It'll be available on the Turning Point website in about a week's time. Look, it's really critical information that you've passed on to us today. I think one of the key messages that we've got across was the importance that if anyone's in contact with opioids, that they have access to naloxone, and I think that's the strongest message that we can start sharing, whether we're AOD workers or not. We do have a couple of questions from the crowd, so bear with me as I pull them up. Kate has asked, can you actually tell us a little bit more about the risks with using heroin on top of methadone? Well,
they're both depressant drugs, and they both depress your respiratory system. So each of those drugs will do a bit to slow down your breathing, and if you use them together, you're doubling up the the risk of slowing your breathing to the point where it's more likely that you're not going to be able to breathe properly.
Yeah. So obviously it's something that we'd recommend people don't do and or not use alone. The same messages is there for any kind of poly drug use, I guess we'd say. Jasmine asks, can naloxone be advised in a 12-week rehabilitation program to clients for alcohol and cannabis addiction recovery? So I'm thinking that just raises the point about naloxone's relevance beyond opioid use.
Well, naloxone won't work on cannabis, and it won't work on alcohol, and it won't work on benzodiazepines. It won't work on any drugs besides opioid drugs. Saying that, if people are taking a multitude of drugs, if they're taking heroin and they've been drinking and they've got some benzodiazepines in their system and they're not breathing, giving them naloxone, taking the opioids out of the picture might be enough to get them breathing again. But in itself, it's probably not going to, it's not going to really help anything with alcohol. I would say, though, that people coming out of rehab for opioid dependence or opioid use, or coming out of detox even for opioid use, are at really high risk of opioids overdose. Yeah. So in the world I would like, there wouldn't be opioid overdose, but anyone that has a history of opioid use leaving a rehab would be given naloxone going out.
That's great. That's a really great answer to the question. Dee also wants to know, and I think this is a good question, you may or may not have it for us off the top of your head. What's the onset and duration of action of Nixoid? Do you know?
It should work roughly the same. The onset, that's the kind of guidelines. However, after a few minutes, and I haven't got the exact number of minutes in my head right now, if you were to give someone a dose of Prenoxate and someone else a dose of Nixoid, after a few minutes they're going to have a lot more naloxone in their blood from the Nixoid than they are from the single dose of Prenoxate, after like 10 minutes or something like that. Yeah. But it should work fairly the same.
Yeah, cool. And if anyone has any questions, they feel free to get in touch with us, and we can, some of the ones that we don't get to, we can potentially respond to offline as well, if Chris doesn't mind. Marcel wants to know, says, love your t-shirt. How do I get one?
Actually, if you go, I wonder if that's Marcel from Youth Projects.
It could very well be.
If that is Marcel from Youth Projects, hi Marcel. If you go on to we run International Overdose Awareness Day, and if you go on to the International Overdose Awareness Day website, there's downloadable stuff, and there's downloadable t-shirt designs that you can bring to a t-shirt printer and get it printed.
Cool. Have everyone wearing one. Look, we're probably going to have to wrap up in a minute. I've got one more question for you before we sort of move on. And I think this is an important thing to raise. Ray asks, do you know if police carry naloxone or anyone else in the community? Sometimes ambulances can take a long time. And I guess that leads on to a question I had about where do we get access to it as everyday people?
The police in general, in Victoria anyway, do not carry naloxone, not as a standard piece of equipment. I have heard that there are police officers that do carry it, but I can't say who, I don't know who they are. The ambos certainly carry the stuff, but I mean, it would be ideal if the police would carry it, especially now that there's no needles involved. But saying that, the police do fully support this programme. In fact, Victoria Police are on the reference group for the COPE programme, and we even have some information for police officers on our website. You can get naloxone like I say, on a prescription or over the counter, so you can talk to your doctor about it if you want. Or if you're in Victoria, you can go to one of the Naloxone Subsidy Initiative agencies and speak to them about it, which are in some of the bigger needle and syringe programs around the state.
Thanks, Chris. That's actually a really good point, guys. You can access, firstly, the 2019 overdose report that Chris mentioned earlier today at the on the Pennington website. So in the slides that you download, you'll be able to click on the link and it'll take you straight there. You can also access any of the fact sheets that Chris has brought to your attention today, if you've seen them, and feel free to share those around with people you know, people you work with, people in your community. And also there's a list of some of those Naloxone training organisations and subsidised.
Yeah. There is, in fact, if you go onto the Pennington Institute website, and there's a thing that says COPE up the top, I don't know what it's called, a tab or whatever they call those things, and it drops down, there's the fact sheets, and at the bottom we have a list, and I think it's complete, but it may not, of every agency we know of in Australia that does naloxone training. So you pick your state, and the only state, unfortunately, there is no naloxone training at the moment is in Tasmania, but there is pretty much everywhere else.
Amazing, amazing. We have had a few more questions come through, guys. Look, we probably don't have a lot of time to get back to them, but as I said, we're happy to flick you a couple of emails. We've got your details and we can send out that information after the fact. Before we go, just a final reminder for everybody that Saturday is International Overdose Awareness Day. It's Saturday the 31st of August. If you want to attend an event, you can go to overdoseday.com, as I think Chris mentioned earlier, and click find an activity in your local area. So we strongly recommend that. And
maybe even hold an event if you can. And events can be something as small as a minute's silence.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and we've registered today's webinar as an event, so congratulations. So congratulations to everybody who has actually turned up and come with us today. I just want to let you know that Turning Point's counselling online forums are also hosting an online event in acknowledgement and support of people who are affected by grief and loss of life due to overdose. It's specifically for friends and specifically a part of the Friends and Family forum that's on the Counselling Online website, and again you can follow the link that you can see on your slides to get there, to pay tribute to someone who has lost their life or been injured by overdose. We welcome everybody, either yourselves or your clients or anyone in the community, to share some stories about somebody and or reply to some of the other events that are on that forum there. So feel free to access the event by following the link that we've provided for you there. So that's pretty much it from us. I'd like to give a special thanks to Chris. It's been a pleasure chatting to you today and learning a little bit more than we already know, and a bit of a reminder and a refresher for some of us. Thanks to you guys as our viewers. It's been really great having you with us. As I said, the webinar will be available for watching on demand. Just keep an eye on the Turning Point website, or for those of you who watch the VADA e-news, we'll pop a post up there as well. I really would love it if everybody could just stay online for the exit survey that will pop up as soon as we disappear off the screen. Alternately, you can click the survey icon tool, as I said. Our next webinar will be happening on Monday the 30th of September at 1 p.m. I'll be joining you again, except this time I'll be sitting in Chris's seat. I'll be presenting to you the topic, responding to new psychoactive substance use in the AOD sector. So giving you a little bit of a broad overview of what we know about some of the new psychoactive substances out there, and AOD workers' capacity for responding to those. So hopefully we'll see you then. You can find out more and register online for that webinar on the Turning Point website. Stay tuned for that. But thanks for being with us live today. And stick around for the exit survey, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.